gotcha.
Maybe nice. Head back. I can fix it. I can fix it. Fix what? Those tricks in the TVA. You heard them. Yours. We get back.
Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to the Q-Man channel. If you enjoy our content, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Today we are going to be discussing the movie Deadpool Wolverine 2024. The desert sun beat down, a relentless echo of the chaotic energy brewing within Wade Wilson, once the irreverent mercenary known as Deadpool, now seemingly adrift after the dissolution of the timelines he so carelessly manipulated. He wasn't exactly retired, more like on an extended, mandatory sabbatical enforced by the bureaucratic, almost painfully mundane Time Variance Authority, or TVA, a place so devoid of excitement it made fighting an army of cyborgs seem like a spa day. His usual wisecracks were muffled, replaced by a grudging compliance, a strange new layer to the character who built his legend on never taking anything seriously. This fragile peace was violently shattered by the arrival of X-23, Laura Kinney, a young woman whose very existence was a living testament to the shadowy, often horrific genetic experiments of the Weapon X program, the very crucible that forged Wade's own scarred exterior and equally damaged psyche. Laura wasn't just looking for refuge. She carried the heavy burden of a future that was rapidly collapsing, a sense that the established order, even the one overseen by the TVA, was fatally flawed. Her presence immediately dragged Wade back into the fray, less by choice and more by the inescapable gravitational pull of responsibility, something he'd spent years actively running from. The narrative quickly pivoted, drawing in a grizzled, world-weary Logan, the Wolverine, a man whose entire existence has been a cycle of violence, redemption, and inevitable loss. Hugh Jackman's return felt significant, not merely as a cameo, but as the embodiment of a certain strain of heroism that contrasts sharply with Deadpool's meta-commentary. Logan, much like Wade in his own way, is defined by his past, the countless lives he's taken, the failed attempts at normalcy. Here, he is presented as a reluctant mentor, or perhaps just a fellow survivor dragged into the whirlpool. His inspiration, drawn from classic samurai cinema and sheer brute force, clashes beautifully with Wade's pop culture-saturated approach. Their uneasy alliance is forged under duress, a necessary evil against a looming threat, perhaps another rogue element seeking to rewrite history, or maybe just the existential dread of their own frayed realities. The action sequences are predictably brutal, yet infused with a kinetic energy that highlights the unique fighting styles. Wolverine's relentless, almost purely instinctual slashing, and Deadpool's chaotic, fourth-wall-breaking acrobatics. There's a running commentary, naturally, from Wade, questioning the very structure of the narrative, poking fun at the tropes of team-ups, and lamenting the lack of decent chimichangas in this particular temporal nexus. As they navigate crumbling realities and evade the sterile enforcement of the TVA, the emotional core begins to surface. It's not just about punching bad guys, it's about finding purpose when your own existence has been manufactured or irrevocably broken. Laura represents a chance for both men, Logan to potentially redeem some of his failures as a father figure, and Wade to prove that beneath the scarred facade and the constant jokes, there is a flicker of genuine connection. The film builds toward a confrontation that demands true synergy, forcing the cynical mercenary and the stoic mutant to finally synchronize their methods, moving beyond individual trauma toward a shared, messy objective. The resolution inevitably involves a mountain of debris and perhaps a temporary, uneasy truce with the universe, leaving the door slightly ajar for the next inevitable catastrophe that only this specific, deeply damaged duo can handle. The strained camaraderie between Logan and Wade is a study in contrasts, a perpetual push and pull between existential angst and manic absurdity. Logan moves through the unfolding crisis with the grim acceptance of a man who has seen too many sunrises over too many graves. His dialogue is sparse, often just a low growl or a grunt that conveys volumes of accumulated grief. The weight of the adamantium seems to press not just on his bones, but on his very soul. This version of Wolverine feels particularly beaten down, perhaps haunted by the ghosts of timelines where he failed those he cared for most, his inspiration rooted in stoic honor codes that Wade cheerfully ignores. Wade, conversely, uses humor as both shield and weapon. His constant stream of non-sequiturs and self-referential jokes serves to momentarily deflate the crushing seriousness of their predicament. When they are forced into close quarters, perhaps sharing a cramped hiding spot or arguing over the last functioning communication device, Wade relentlessly probes Logan's emotional armor, not out of malice, but from a genuine, albeit bizarrely expressed, need for connection. He sees in Logan's world weariness a reflection of his own deep-seated fear of isolation. After all, Wade's entire career has been punctuated by characters who either betray him or die. Seeing the enduring, if miserable presence of the original X-Man is almost comforting in its predictability. Laura, the conduit for this reunion, possesses a silent intensity that commands respect even from these two veterans of chaos. She is the narrative's moral compass, possessing a raw, untamed strength that mirrors Logan's youth but is tempered by an adult understanding of consequence that Wade has never bothered to acquire. Her fighting style isn't theatrical. It's efficient, deadly, and speaks volumes about her inherent desire for survival in a world that tried to erase her humanity. Watching Logan watch Laura move is a subtle cinematic touchstone, a flicker of paternal regret crossing his features, an acknowledgement of a path not taken, or perhaps a path ruined by his own past actions as a blunt instrument of terrible science. The setting itself often feels like an active participant in their struggle, whether they are traversing a dimension where gravity is optional or fighting through the pristine, soul-crushing halls of a bureaucratic holding facility. The environment mirrors their internal states. the chaos of the action is always grounded by a raw, almost painful physicality. When Logan lands a devastating blow, you feel the strain in his knuckles. When Wade takes a hit, he's immediately calculating how to spin the ensuing injury into a new profitable merchandise opportunity, even as his healing factor scrambles to knit bone. This blend of profound suffering and flippant disregard creates the film's unique tension, suggesting that perhaps the only way to truly survive the end of everything is to stop caring about the rules. A lesson Wade learned long ago, and one Logan is finally, grudgingly, being forced to relearn through his unlikely protege and his even more unlikely partner. The narrative trajectory consistently steers toward moments of poignant, unscripted vulnerability that pierce through the established layers of irony and anger. Consider a sequence where the trio is cornered, not by a supervillain, but by the relentless passive aggression of the TVA's temporal enforcement drones, machines devoid of motive beyond maintaining the status quo. In such a moment of overwhelming tactical disadvantage, Wade doesn't crack a joke about the uniformity of their armor. Instead, he executes a maneuver that perfectly shields Laura, a move born not of practiced choreography, but of pure, reactive instinct to protect the one person who seems genuinely to value the simple act of existing without an agenda. This is the crucial evolution. Wade Wilson acting without the immediate expectation of a payoff or a punchline. Logan's response to this selfless action is almost imperceptible, yet it forms the emotional climax of their temporary alliance. It's not a word of praise, but a slight lowering of his stance as he engages the drones, signaling an unspoken acceptance of Wade as a necessary, if irritating, part of the solution. For Logan, whose career has been defined by pushing people away to save them from his own inherent danger, this quiet acknowledgement is the equivalent of a heartfelt declaration. He is recognizing a fellow soldier, scarred in different ways, but equally committed to survival, even if survival means protecting a future they don't fully understand. This echoes Logan's own journey following his mentorship of Kitty Pryde, or X-23, where his greatest strength became the willingness, however painful, to engage with hope. Laura serves as the anchor in this temporal storm. Her silence is heavy with the weight of potential, the potential Wade squandered in his youth, and the potential Logan felt he betrayed. She isn't inspired by comic books or ancient martial arts. Her motivation is cleaner: stop the fracturing reality so she can simply be. When she finally does speak at length, it's often a direct challenge to one of the men, cutting through Wade's performance art and questioning Logan's perpetual melancholy. She forces them to confront the fact that their past traumas, the forced genetic enhancements, the endless battles, have left them perfectly equipped for this specific apocalypse, yet utterly ill-equipped for any semblance of peace. The visual storytelling leans heavily into this dichotomy. When they fight side by side, Wolverine is often rendered in deep shadows and sharp, metallic reflections, a creature of visceral reality. Deadpool, however, is constantly bathed in unnatural lighting, the harsh fluorescence of a forgotten government facility, or the vibrant, sickening greens of temporal distortions, emphasizing his status as an anomaly, a character existing slightly outside the established laws of physics and narrative consequence. Their eventual victory, if achieved, will not be clean or permanent. It will be a messy, painful affirmation that sometimes the most broken pieces fit together just tightly enough to hold the line against total collapse, powered by shared trauma and the faint flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, they won't have to do this all over again next Tuesday. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation leaves the trio battered, not just physically, but spiritually exhausted by the sheer effort of imposing momentary order onto cosmic chaos. The bureaucratic tentacles of the TVA, though momentarily stunned by their overwhelming unorthodox firepower, begin to reassert themselves with chilling efficiency. This is where the true conflict shifts from external threat to systemic oppression. Wade, momentarily stripped of his usual bravado by the sheer scale of the temporal cleanup required, starts to see the TVA not as a collection of mildly annoying desk clerks, but as the ultimate gatekeepers of stagnation, the entity determined to keep the universe running on a predictable, uninspired track that actively negates the very essence of mutant existence. Logan, whose entire adult life has been a rebellion against imposed control, be it military conditioning or government experimentation, finds an unexpected kinship with Wade's sudden loathing for institutional authority. The shared enemy transcends their personality clashes. They both recognize the sterile uniformity of the TVA as another form of the control Weapon X sought to exert. There's a quiet moment where Logan, perhaps examining the scarred tissue on his own knuckles, looks at Wade not with irritation, but with a grim understanding. Both men are living embodiments of variables the TVA seeks to eliminate. Their previous battles were often about personal revenge or saving one specific person. This one is about the fundamental right to be messy, unpredictable, and alive outside the lines drawn on a timeline chart. Laura, having witnessed the capabilities of her two dysfunctional guardians, begins to actively strategize, her intellect matching her ferocity. She starts piecing together the TVA's operational weaknesses, viewing their rigid protocols as exploitable flaws, a perspective that blends Wade's chaos theory with Logan's tactical discipline. She might even be the one to decipher the true nature of the impending collapse. Perhaps it's not a rogue villain, but the TVA itself, whose attempts to prune too many branches have rendered the trunk too brittle. This places the focus squarely on an internal extraction or sabotage mission, forcing the team deeper into the belly of the temporal beast. The final act hinges on a calculated risk, using their own brokenness as camouflage. Wade suggests a full frontal assault disguised as a parade of temporal violations, knowing the TVA's response systems would be predictable enough to anticipate. Logan surprisingly agrees, recognizing the need to embrace their reputation as walking disasters. It's a desperate lunge for freedom, where their very existence, a healing factor defying conventional physics, a mind that breaks the fourth wall, becomes the ultimate countermeasure against a system obsessed with clean continuity. They fight not for a restored timeline, but for the right to exist in the broken one they've carved out for themselves, messy and magnificent in their mutual wreckage. The infiltration of the central temporal nexus, the supposed heart of the TVA's oppressive order, is less a coordinated assault and more a collision of controlled demolition and high-velocity distraction. Wade, fully embracing the role of the walking liability, sets the stage by deliberately overloading several low-level temporal buffers, resulting in localized reality hiccups that manifest as bizarre anachronisms, Roman legionaries phasing through conference rooms, or perhaps a T-Rex briefly materializing in a security checkpoint. This intentional pandemonium serves as the perfect auditory and visual white noise, a smokescreen woven from pure, unadulterated narrative garbage that only Deadpool could generate. He revels in the chaos, barking instructions that are half genuine strategy and half improvised one-liners about overdue library books, his own healing factor working overtime to manage the constant, low-grade temporal feedback he generates by existing so aggressively outside established reality. Logan, moving through the resulting confusion, appears almost serene amidst the digital breakdown. His focus is razor-sharp, the adamantium claws slicing through enforcement drones with a terrifying mechanical rhythm, each strike precise and economical. He is functioning on pure, ingrained muscle memory, channeling every painful lesson learned from various dojos, battlefields, and his own self-imposed exile. What's compelling here is the visual shift in his demeanor. The usual world weariness is replaced by a fierce, almost paternal determination, specifically when he sees Laura moving ahead of him. He's not just fighting for survival. He's fighting to ensure the next generation doesn't have to inherit this endless loop of bureaucratic tyranny and violent existence. He understands that escaping the TVA isn't just about breaking free. It's about denying them the satisfaction of having manufactured their misery. Laura, meanwhile, operates in the quiet gaps created by their mayhem. She's discovered, that the most vulnerable points in the TVA's infrastructure aren't hardware-related, but conceptual. The logical paradoxes inherent in maintaining absolute order in a universe defined by infinite possibility. She uses Wade's explosions as cover to plant specialized resonators, designed to exploit these inconsistencies. There's an incredible moment where she bypasses a supposedly impenetrable energy barrier, not by force, but by calculating the precise moment a localized time loop collapses upon itself, allowing her to slip through the resulting vacuum. Her quiet competence is the perfect foil to Wade's exuberance, providing the necessary ballast that keeps their reckless charge from flying apart entirely. The emotional peak arrives as they confront the primary Nexus Guardian, a figure perhaps even more bureaucratic than the TVA itself. An entity or avatar designed solely to restore proper continuity. When the Guardian attempts to reset Wade by bombarding him with every erased timeline, forcing him to relive moments of profound failure or unbearable loss, it's Logan who intervenes, not with claws, but by physically placing himself between Wade and the blast. This act of pure sacrificial defense, a man who has spent his life trying to escape his own legacy, choosing to embrace the danger for his irreverent companion, is the ultimate refutation of the TVA's logic. It signifies that connection, however dysfunctional, is a reality more potent than any timeline structure. Wade, momentarily stunned into silence, understands. He doesn't crack a joke about the dramatic staging. He simply nods, a gesture loaded with more meaning than 1,000 of his usual monologues. The shared victory is etched in the mutual understanding that they didn't just defeat an enemy. They affirmed their right to exist in the beautiful, contradictory mess they've made of things. With the Nexus Guardian momentarily disabled, staggering under the weight of contradictory realities it tried to impose on Wade, the escape becomes a frantic, desperate scramble rather than a triumphant exit. The temporal distortions Wade unleashed begin to feed back into themselves, creating instability not just around them, but within their very forms. Logan feels the familiar, agonizing thrum of the adamantium within his skeleton as the timeline shifts, threatening to rewrite the metal's very molecular structure. A fear based on every experiment that ever tried to control or undo him. He pushes Laura forward, his movements now less controlled fury and more the desperate piston-like drive of a machine running on emergency reserves, his gruff exterior cracking to reveal the raw anxiety of a protector running out of time. Wade's experience is uniquely terrifying. He's bombarded not just by erased memories, but by alternate versions of himself. 1,000 potential Deadpools. Some successful, some terrifyingly competent, all mocking his current, compromised state. He fights these phantom cells with a manic intensity, his regenerative factor burning furiously as if trying to cauterize the wounds of possibilities. Yet, amidst the psychological assault, the shared act of defiance with Logan has anchored him. He clings to the reality of the living, breathing Logan shielding him, grounding his awareness against the onslaught of what-ifs. He manages a single, genuine, non-sarcastic promise to Logan through gritted teeth. "I'll keep the chimichangas warm, old man, no matter what damn century we end up in." It's his version of eternal commitment. Laura takes charge of the exit strategy, using her intimate knowledge of structural weaknesses gleaned from her own traumatic origins. She identifies a temporal seam, a point where the fabric of controlled reality is thin due to the overloaded buffers, and guides them toward it. This journey through the seam is visually represented as a harrowing passage through pure color and fractured sound, a true journey into the unknown void outside the mandated flow of time. It demands complete trust. Logan has to rely on the sharp instincts of the weapon he helped create, and Wade has to silence the narrator in his head long enough to simply hold on tight. They spill out not into their own time, but into a quiet, almost forgotten corner of reality, a place intentionally excised by the TVA for its lack of significance. It's an almost pastoral setting, devoid of immediate threat, which is almost more unnerving for the three hardened survivors. The silence is deafening after the cosmic roar of the Nexus. In this pause, the true consequence of their actions settles in. They haven't won a war, they've merely found a temporary, obscure sanctuary. Logan looks at Wade and Laura, a faint, almost ghost-like smile touching his lips, a sight so rare it suggests profound internal reconciliation. He doesn't speak of the future or the threats they left behind. Instead, he simply says, his voice raspy but clear, "We walk away from this. Together." It's not a command. It's a statement of fact based on the bond forged in shared extremity. Wade, for once, has no immediate retort, just a tired, deeply felt exhale. The journey may have ended their immediate crisis, but it has cemented a new, incredibly volatile and fiercely loyal family unit, forever bonded by the shared experience of fighting the very laws of storytelling itself. They walk into the quiet landscape, three broken instruments finally resonating in a strange, imperfect harmony. The quietude of their refuge, a temporal cul-de-sac deemed insignificant by the TVA, settles around them like a heavy, unfamiliar blanket. This place, outside the main currents of established history, possesses an unsettling stillness, lacking the inherent noise of consequence or the promise of immediate danger. For Logan, this sudden lack of external conflict is almost more taxing than the battle itself. His entire physiology, honed by decades of forced alertness, screams against the inertia. He instinctively scans the perimeter, not for enemies, but for the subtle signs of temporal decay, the invisible seams that might betray the TVA's lingering reach. His inspiration here shifts from the heroic defiance of a warrior to the quiet vigilance of a protector, seeking genuine, sustainable shelter for his wards. He begins assessing their resources, minimal, salvaged, and deeply unreliable. Yet he approaches the task with a methodical calmness, an internalized discipline that Wade and Laura watch with cautious interest. Wade, stripped of his armor and the immediate need to crack wise, experiences a profound vulnerability. The silence allows the residual echoes of the timeline assault to resonate, not the jokes, but the pain of erased memories. He finds himself picking at the seams of his own suit, a nervous tic replacing his usual gesturing. He studies Logan, seeking reassurance not through banter, but through the sheer presence of the older mutant. Wade's career has been defined by self-destruction as a form of performance art. Here, forced into a role of sustained responsibility, he grapples with the concept of long-term survival. He realizes that his meta-awareness, his ability to see the framework of the story, is now a liability if it prevents him from living authentically within whatever broken reality remains. He tentatively attempts a gesture of normalcy, perhaps trying to fashion a makeshift fire pit, his movements clumsy and overly deliberate, a mercenary attempting domesticity. Laura, observing their quiet struggle, becomes the pragmatic anchor. She moves away from them, exploring the edges of their temporary sanctuary. Her movements suggest she is charting the metaphysical boundaries, testing how far the TVA's influence extends before the local reality snaps back into place. She finds something, perhaps an ancient, forgotten piece of technology, or a strange, naturally occurring distortion, that suggests this pocket dimension isn't just ignored, it was deliberately sealed off. This discovery hints that their safe haven might actually be a containment unit, albeit one forgotten by its jailers. She doesn't announce her findings with fanfare. Instead, she presents the evidence, a calculated risk analysis rendered visible through her actions to the two older mutants. The emotional resonance deepens as they collectively acknowledge their new, unplanned family dynamic. Logan's earlier sacrifice was a moment of pure heroism. This prolonged, quiet existence tests the sustainability of that bond. He looks at Wade, not as the irritating sidekick, but as a fundamentally decent man, buried under layers of trauma and humor, and sees a necessary counterpoint to his own relentless grimness. For the first time, they might be operating without an external ticking clock, forcing them to confront the internal questions. What do they owe each other now? How do they build something resembling a future when their pasts are made of temporal shrapnel? The film lingers on this fragile truce, suggesting that the ultimate victory isn't destroying a villain, but achieving a moment of shared, unscripted peace, even if they know, intrinsically, that such peace can never truly last for beings as inherently chaotic as they are. The fragile ecology of their hidden pocket soon reveals its own slow-moving menace. Entropy amplified by temporal isolation. The air itself feels stale, and the salvaged equipment Wade managed to keep, mostly non-essential tech, naturally, begins to flicker erratically, unable to maintain cohesion in a space detached from the primary flow of causality. Logan senses the decay first, a deep evolutionary alarm signaling that survival isn't about fighting an army, but outmaneuvering the slow dissolution of the very atoms around them. His ingrained survival instincts, usually triggered by immediate threat, are now focused on preservation against an existential rot. He becomes obsessed with finding an exit, not back into the chaotic timelines they fled, but toward a place with some semblance of structural integrity, even if that place is hostile. Wade, surprisingly, finds a morbid comfort in the stagnation. For a man whose entire persona relies on constant motion and reaction, the forced pause allows a strange form of mental decluttering. He spends hours simply observing Laura, sketching her profile onto a salvaged piece of metallic casing with a piece of charcoal he fashioned. These sketches aren't for commercial sale or mockery. They are detailed studies of form and potential, a silent acknowledgement of her inherent worth beyond her combat utility. This act of focused artistic observation is perhaps the quietest, most genuine character development Wade has ever undergone, a testament to the profound impact of seeing potential in another damaged soul. His constant narration quiets, replaced by mumbled philosophical musings about the nature of permanence versus narrative necessity. Laura, however, pushes back against the quietude. She rejects the idea of passive endurance. While Logan is studying escape vectors and Wade is sketching, she is actively working to stabilize their immediate environment. She discovers that the boundary of their sanctuary isn't static. It pulses, reacting to large infusions of energy, like the residual temporal radiation left over from their escape. She proposes a desperate, calculated maneuver, not escaping the pocket, but charging it enough to force a controlled, localized breach back into a less patrolled section of the main timeline, effectively using the TVA's own flawed containment field against them. This plan requires an energy source of immense, unstable power. The realization dawns. One of them must willingly act as the conduit, the temporary lightning rod for the chaotic temporal discharge needed to punch a hole through the boundary. Logan immediately steps forward, his body already composed of the most unstable element in the multiverse, adamantium laced with years of accelerated healing feedback. He views it as his final, definitive act of utility, a way to use his cursed biology for something other than prolonged suffering. Wade, however, violently objects. He counters Logan's stoic martyrdom with a pragmatic, if still darkly humorous argument. Logan's body is too stable, too rigid. He is the true variable. His unpredictable healing factor is designed to absorb and repurpose catastrophic failure. Wade argues, perhaps for the first time without irony, that he is the only one biologically equipped to survive the shock required to open a new path. The ensuing argument is fierce, not about who is stronger, but about who has the greater right to self-sacrifice for the sake of the other two. It's a battle over who gets to bear the final burden, a true turning point where both veterans finally prioritize the well-being of the younger, less damaged member of their makeshift unit over their own deeply ingrained self-loathing. The confrontation over who would become the living conduit for their escape is raw, devoid of the usual fourth-wall cushioning or witty deflection. Logan's insistence on self-sacrifice stems from a lifetime spent believing his existence is inherently toxic, a necessary evil whose only true utility lies in protecting others from his own contaminated presence. His voice, usually a low rumble, takes on the ragged edge of finality as he argues that his long exposure to violence has somehow immunized him to the worst aspects of temporal shock, a pathetic justification for choosing death. He looks at Wade with an expression that borders on plea, a silent acknowledgement that if Wade survives, he might finally find some semblance of peace, something Logan has long deemed impossible for himself. Wade's refusal is visceral, an almost physical recoil from the notion of Logan's martyrdom. His typical bravado melts away to reveal a core of pure, protective rage. He screams, not just with volume, but with the accumulated frustration of every timeline where he failed to save someone important. "No, you old tin can. You don't get to check out yet. You're the damn plot anchor. If you die, the universe forgets how to be grumpy. Besides," he forces a strained laugh, quickly dissolving, "who the hell is going to teach Laura the correct usage of context clues and terrible 80s action movie references if you're gone?" This isn't comedy. It's a desperate plea for Logan to accept life, even a messy, hunted one, alongside them. He points to his own suit, the red and black a symbol of his own constant flux. "I'm the glitch. I'm the bug in the system. I thrive on incompatible data. Let the walking mistake handle the catastrophe." Laura watches them, her face a mask of intense concentration, absorbing their arguments not as dialogue, but as data points regarding resource allocation and risk assessment. She intervenes not with threats, but with a sudden, undeniable demonstration of superior analysis. She points to the energy readings fluctuating wildly near the boundary, indicating that the required force pulse needs a precise, repeating frequency of chaotic input, something that can heal through massive damage faster than the damage accrues. She confirms Wade's theory. His unique, near-instantaneous and entirely illogical healing factor is the only mechanism capable of processing the necessary temporal overload without simply atomizing. Logan's adamantium skeleton, while tough, is too rigid. It would shatter under the specific type of nonlinear energy they need to manipulate. The decision made through brutal logic rather than sentiment, Logan steps back, the weight of his near martyrdom settling into profound relief mixed with lingering guilt. He places a heavy, calloused hand on Wade's shoulder, a rare, unprompted gesture of genuine respect. "Don't you dare make a joke when you come back through, Wilson. I'll gut you myself." Wade nods, absorbing the contact, the warmth of it seeping through the scarred flesh. He moves toward the seam, his expression settling into a focus only seen in his most lethal moments. As he prepares to interface with the unstable boundary, he casts one last look at his companions, a look that implies not just goodbye, but a shared understanding of their enduring entanglement. The film builds to the ultimate display of Wade Wilson's chaotic heroism, embracing the raw, unfiltered absurdity of his own existence, not for profit or a joke, but as the required sacrifice to secure a future for the two broken people he has, against all narrative expectation, come to depend upon. He plunges into the energy field, becoming a blinding, screaming singularity of red and black, a desperate, necessary mess tearing open the fabric of reality so that a grumpy old man and a silent young woman might find a quiet spot to simply exist. The temporal breach, ripped open by Wade's agonizing absorption of the pocket dimension's unstable energy, snaps shut almost instantly once the required chaotic force has been exerted. Silence descends again, heavier this time, a profound absence where the screaming singularity of Deadpool had just been. Logan and Laura stand amidst the flickering remnants of the boundary field, the air thick with the smell of ozone and burnt possibility. The immediate danger has passed, but the emotional landscape is devastated. Logan stares at the spot where Wade disappeared, the hand he placed on Wilson's shoulder now feeling suddenly cold, his victory tasting entirely of ash. He had argued for life, Yet Wade had chosen the role of the sacrificial lamb, not out of self-loathing like Logan, but out of a sudden fierce affirmation of their shared messy reality. Logan's reaction is predictably muted but deeply felt. He doesn't roar or smash objects. Instead, he sinks slowly to his knees, the sheer exhaustion of the preceding weeks finally catching up. His focus immediately shifts to Laura, the one constant that survived the ordeal. He looks at her, not as a weapon or a responsibility, but as the surviving piece of the unit he helped forge. He needs to act, not just for her safety, but to honor Wade's impossible gesture. His decades of military training kick in, demanding a plan for relocation and recovery, but his heart demands a moment of respect for the fallen jester. He rises, his movements stiff, and begins meticulously gathering any salvaged piece of Wade's gear, a useless mask shard, a belt buckle, treating them with the reverence usually reserved for sacred relics. Laura, however, is not ready for reverence. She examines the residue of the breach, her brow furrowed with analytical intensity. She understands the physics of Wade's absorption. His healing factor wouldn't simply destroy him. It would assimilate the chaotic energy and attempt to rebuild him on a new, fundamentally altered template, likely spitting him out somewhere wildly inappropriate. She uses the faint residual energy signatures on her own claws to triangulate the potential vector of his ejection. Her actions speak louder than any eulogy. She is already calculating the coordinates for the next search and rescue mission, unwilling to accept the TVA's enforced continuity, or even Wade's own fatalistic choice, as the final word. This sets the trajectory for the final movement of the story. Logan and Laura stepping out of their temporary sanctuary, armed with knowledge and a shared, unspoken vow to retrieve their impossible teammate. Their journey back into the main currents of time is a stealth operation, a complete reversal of their earlier destructive entrance. They move with a newfound, grim efficiency, Logan utilizing his experience to navigate the subtle pitfalls of established timelines, and Laura acting as a human divining rod, tracking the unique energy signature of a heavily mutated, time-displaced Deadpool. The film concludes not with a grand battle, but with the quiet, relentless pursuit of connection across the fractured multiverse, showcasing that even for characters defined by tragedy, the pull of found family can be the most powerful force in any timeline. They are hunting not a villain, but their own damaged, wisecracking heart, proving that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism involve dragging the one who tried to save everyone else back into the fight, simply because he belongs with them. The return to the main temporal current is jarring, a violent collision of order and the lingering chaos Wade Wilson brought with him. Logan and Laura emerge onto a relatively stable, yet unfamiliar timeline, perhaps a quiet, rain-slicked metropolis in the late 1990s, far removed from the sterile bureaucracy of the TVA, but still teeming with the mundane threats of a world that tries to ignore the unusual. The quiet streets serve only to amplify the urgency of their mission. Logan moves with the focused intensity of a predator scenting its prey, his senses hyper-tuned, not just for immediate danger, but for the faint, almost imperceptible signature of Wade's hyper-accelerated healing factor interacting with unfamiliar temporal physics. For Logan, the guilt of allowing Wade to sacrifice himself is a physical burden, manifesting as an almost reckless speed. He pushes Laura harder than ever, recognizing that her youth is her greatest asset, her adaptability, and he must secure her future before his own inevitable violent end catches up. He finds himself communicating with her less through grunts and more through direct, concise operational commands, a conscious effort to be the clear, dependable figure Wade always lacked in his formative years. His inspiration shifts from personal atonement to the active creation of a viable future for the girl who links them all. Laura proves to be an astonishing tracker. She ignores traditional surveillance and instead focuses on anomalies in cultural noise. A sudden spike in sales of a specific, obscure comic book, a strange surge in the popularity of a particular terrible pop song that mirrors Wade's earlier tastes, anything that suggests a localized, chaotic presence. She theorizes that Wade, in his compromised state, wouldn't be able to maintain perfect camouflage. He would inevitably try to exert his personality onto the timeline, however subtly. She posits that he's likely trying to integrate by becoming the ultimate noisy distraction, perhaps unwittingly causing historical footnotes to pivot wildly. Their pursuit leads them to an abandoned, highly stylized musical theater in the city's forgotten district. The environment itself screams of forced performance, velvet curtains, dusty spotlights, and an unsettling echo. Inside, they find evidence of recent chaotic activity, singed stage props, a trail of suspiciously pristine white bandages, and a single, perfectly preserved chimichanga sitting on a dressing room table, lukewarm, as if left moments ago. This isn't the work of a man dying. It's the work of a man rapidly evolving under extreme stress. The confrontation, when it finally occurs, is not a fight, but an intervention. Wade isn't fighting them. He's performing for them. A desperate, manic solo act on stage under a single harsh spotlight. His appearance is startling. His skin seems more scarred, the red of his suit somehow brighter, almost burning. He moves with impossible fluidity, his powers enhanced, perhaps even warped, by the temporal blast. He's cycling through personalities, a moment of near-silent, intense focus replaced instantly by a booming, overly dramatic monologue about the existential horror of being permanently unretirable. When Logan and Laura step onto the stage, Wade stops mid-pirouette. He looks at them, and the desperate performance falls away, revealing a raw, almost fragile understanding. He didn't just survive the energy surge, he integrated it, becoming something more unstable, more powerful, and deeply fearful of his own new capabilities. He holds up a hand, showing them not just regeneration, but a faint, shimmering distortion around his fingertips. "It worked," he whispers, the first truly sober statement he's made. "But now, I'm too loud." I'm going to break everything just by existing here. The film ends on this terrifying realization. They managed to save him from a clean death, only to bring him back as an even greater, uncontrollable variable in a universe determined to enforce order. Their victory is merely the prologue to an even larger existential threat, one that Wade himself now embodies. The realization hanging in the stale, theatrical air, that Wade is now a walking, talking existential threat to this timeline, brings a chilling finality to their reunion. Logan doesn't flinch from the shimmering distortion around Wade's hand. Instead, a grim acknowledgement passes between the two veterans. For Logan, this is merely the latest iteration of a curse, a weapon too volatile for containment. He sees in Wade's enhanced, dangerously vibrant form not a partner, but a ticking time bomb that he, uniquely, has the biological blueprint to contain, if only temporarily. His gruff exterior stiffens into protective resolve. The mission shifts from retrieving Wade to managing him. Laura steps forward, her posture suggesting a readiness to subdue, if necessary. But her focus is keenly fixed on the how of Wade's instability. She approaches the stage not as an enemy, but as a scientist confronting a volatile compound. She speaks softly, her voice cutting through the echo of the theater, addressing the phenomenon rather than the man. "The energy assimilation is unstable. You're bleeding timelines, Wade. We need a dampener, something external to siphon the excess." Her tone is devoid of fear, treating Wade's near-apocalypse with the detached focus she once reserved for dissecting genetic code. This clinical approach is both a comfort and an insult to Wade, who desperately seeks emotional validation for his terrifying transformation. Wade recoils slightly from her proximity, the power around him flaring defensively. The fear in his eyes is genuine, not the fear of death, but the fear of becoming what he always mocked, a monster without purpose, capable only of destruction. A dampener. Logan, honey, I am the dampener. I'm the black hole of narrative consequence. We punch a hole back into the TVA, give them this glorious upgrade, and tell them to have a nice apocalypse. His voice cracks between bravado and sheer panic. He is terrified of hurting Laura, seeing her as the last pure thing they've encountered, the ultimate failure if he corrupts her with his amplified chaos. Logan intervenes, slowly ascending the steps onto the stage. He doesn't try to physically restrain Wade. Instead, he uses the weight of his own history as leverage. You think I don't know what it's like to be a walking plague, Wilson? Every time I heal, I come back angrier, sharper, and more alone. You don't get to ditch us because you got upgraded. We figure out how to cage it. You're not going solo because this time, you're not just fighting for the punchline. You're fighting for the quiet moments, the ones you just bought us. He meets Wade's gaze, his own eyes reflecting the grim metallic reality of his own permanent damage. This is Logan admitting that survival isn't just about enduring, it's about enduring together. Laura finds the solution within the theater itself, a relic of the very performance era Wade is referencing. Perhaps an ancient, forgotten piece of theatrical rigging or stage effects equipment capable of generating precise, low-frequency counter-vibrations. It's absurdly mundane, a perfect foil to cosmic-level power. She works swiftly, ignoring the erratic energy bursts, treating the unstable Deadpool as a complex machine needing calibration rather than a threat requiring execution. The climax isn't a fight, but a delicate act of forced stabilization. As Laura wires the makeshift dampener, perhaps crude copper coils and frayed theater wiring, Logan acts as the shield, physically absorbing the sporadic energy flares that lash out from Wade, his healing factor already beginning to strain under the unfamiliar power surges. When the device is finally activated, it emits a low, almost subsonic hum, forcing Wade's chaotic energy field inward. The visual effect is stunning. The intense, searing light fades, leaving a residual, manageable glow. Wade slumps, exhausted, his costume now duller, the timeline pollution contained. He looks up at Logan and Laura standing over him, not as an audience, but as custodians. So, Wade rasps, his voice almost normal again. Nap time, or do we start looking for a dimension with better coffee? The shared, weary acceptance in Logan's sigh, and the slight, almost imperceptible softening of Laura's stance, confirm their new reality. They are not heroes fighting a war, but a dysfunctional family constantly managing each other's catastrophic flaws. Their existence is now defined by the quiet maintenance of their collective brokenness. The confluence of Ryan Reynolds' tenure as the titular merc with a mouth, and Hugh Jackman's deeply ingrained persona as the gruff, near-immortal mutant, sets the stage for a cinematic event that transcends the typical superhero sequel. This installment, far from being a mere retread, promises a mature, possibly elegiac exploration of two characters perpetually existing on the fringes of the established X-Men mythology. Reynolds' Deadpool, forever the meta-commentator, brings a self-awareness that constantly fractures the fourth wall, a narrative device that has become his signature, rooted in the surprisingly successful R-rated origins that defied studio expectations. His comedic timing, honed through years in ensemble comedies and his own brand building, serves as the perfect foil for Jackman's unwavering commitment to Wolverine's stoicism. Jackman's history with the character, spanning over 2 decades across multiple iterations of the X-Men franchise, provides a profound weight to his return. This isn't just a cameo. It suggests a final, definitive chapter for Logan, perhaps even a confrontation with his own legacy of violence and isolation. The visual language surrounding Wolverine, often emphasizing shadow, grit, and visceral combat, contrasts sharply with Deadpool's bright, chaotic energy. When these two forces collide, the tension isn't just physical, it's ideological. Deadpool seeks validation and chaos, while Wolverine embodies burdened responsibility. The anticipated narrative thrust seems to pivot away from the pristine, corporatized world often depicted in earlier Marvel productions, leaning instead into the grittier, more emotionally resonant tones established in Jackman's solo venture, Logan. If the film leans into the dynamic established in the comics, we can expect a road trip structure, forcing reluctant partnership upon the pair. This forced proximity allows for the necessary friction. Logan's exhaustion with life contrasted with Wade's relentless pathological need for engagement. Reynolds' mastery lies in the rapid-fire delivery and the ability to pivot instantaneously from heartfelt sincerity, rare but impactful, to vulgar absurdity. This agility prevents the film from collapsing under the weight of its own self-referential humor. Conversely, Jackman's strength lies in the unspoken, the slump of his shoulders, the barely contained rage beneath the surface. Their chemistry, which has been teased effectively in prior appearances, needs sufficient space here to breathe and evolve beyond simple banter into something resembling begrudging mutual respect, a hallmark of classic buddy cop dynamics transposed onto mutant physiology. The introduction of new elements, whether they involve bureaucratic entities like the Time Variance Authority or perhaps more street-level threats, will test the limits of their established power sets. For Deadpool, adaptation is instinctual. For Wolverine, resilience is the default setting. The film's success hinges not just on the expected high-octane action sequences, the claws versus the katanas, the regeneration against blunt trauma, but on whether it allows these two deeply scarred figures a moment of genuine connection amidst the inevitable explosion of colorful violence and pop culture debris. It's a balancing act between spectacle and soul, a gamble on whether an audience invested in these anti-heroes craves both the laughter and the quiet acknowledgement of their shared, often tragic, existence. The aesthetic promise of Deadpool Wolverine seems to be the collision of distinct cinematic realities. We have the established, almost mythic gravity surrounding Jackman's Logan, a character whose journey has tracked the evolution of blockbuster superhero cinema itself, moving from the brooding seriousness of Bryan Singer's early vision to the bleak, existential despair of James Mangold's final statement on the character. That enduring gravitas is precisely what Deadpool aims to dismantle. Wade Wilson, the result of a failed Weapon X program much like Logan, operates as the ultimate foil precisely because he refuses to treat his circumstances as tragic. His immortality is a cosmic inconvenience to be mocked, not a curse to be endured silently. Reynolds' performance, which has always been as much about physical comedy and meticulous editing as it is about dialogue, thrives on undermining established norms. We anticipate sequences where Wade will directly address the continuity errors and tonal shifts that have plagued the Fox Marvel universe for decades, using his unique narrative license to explain away inconsistencies while simultaneously exploiting them for comedic effect. This level of meta-commentary requires a sophisticated understanding of cinematic history, something Reynolds has consistently demonstrated in his approach to the role, transforming what could have been a one-note gimmick into a deeply layered performance of calculated absurdity. For Jackman, the emotional anchor must be the juxtaposition of his established weariness against Deadpool's relentless pursuit of fun. Logan often appears weighed down by the memories of those he failed to save. His few moments of levity in previous films felt earned through immense sacrifice. In this pairing, Wade might inadvertently serve as a strange form of therapy, forcing Logan to confront the absurdity of existence rather than solely its brutality. The chemistry demands that Logan occasionally cracks, not necessarily with joy, but with a grudging acceptance of Wade's persistence, a sign that even the oldest, angriest mutant can be momentarily distracted from his internal battles. The visual narrative likely employs stylistic shifts to underscore the internal conflict. Expect sequences rendered in heightened saturation, or mimicking the look of older comic book print when Deadpool is driving the action, contrasted with moments of stark, perhaps desaturated realism when Wolverine is forced to confront a genuine threat or moment of introspection. This visual dichotomy mirrors their emotional disparity. Wade lives in the bright, loud present. Logan is perpetually haunted by a muted, violent past. The film's success won't just be measured by the box office receipts, but by whether it manages to integrate these two diametrically opposed energies without letting one completely neutralize the other. It needs Wolverine to remain dangerous and Wade to remain hilarious, finding the sweet spot where earnest heart can momentarily pierce the armor of both cynicism and self-parody. The dynamic between these two icons hinges on the concept of legacy and how one chooses to confront an inescapable fate. Wolverine, having already walked the path toward a quiet, agonizing end in his previous cinematic appearance, is now thrust back into the chaos, likely serving as a reluctant mentor figure or, more accurately, an unwilling babysitter to chaos incarnate. Jackman's performance has always been rooted in the physical manifestation of pain. The scarred knuckles, the tired gait, the way he carries the weight of accumulated centuries. This iteration feels less like the X-Man and more like the solitary survivor, making Deadpool's intrusion all the more grating to his hard-won peace. Deadpool, conversely, views permanence as an opportunity for endless mischief. His healing factor is not merely a superpower, it is a license for moral abandon, enabling him to engage in high-stakes activities without the looming threat of finality that shadows Logan. Reynolds embodies this freedom through hyperverbal gymnastics, a constant barrage designed to keep any serious emotional core at bay. Yet, the most compelling moments in the Deadpool franchise have always occurred when Wade's protective layer of irony cracks, revealing the underlying yearning for acceptance. A yearning Logan, despite his own profound loneliness, might inadvertently recognize. The narrative friction will undoubtedly exploit their differing views on morality. Wolverine operates within a strict, if often violated, code of protecting the innocent, born from profound guilt over his past actions as a weapon. Deadpool's morality is fluid, guided primarily by loyalty to friends and a desire to annoy authority figures, whether they be cosmic entities or studio executives. If the plot demands they cooperate against a significant threat, we will see Wolverine forced to tolerate Wade's morally ambiguous methods, perhaps even requiring him to compromise his own rigid standards, a far more revealing character moment for Logan than any amount of slashing claws. Furthermore, the film is positioned to explore the vast landscape of the multiverse, a concept inherently opposed to Logan's grounded, analog existence. While Deadpool revels in timeline manipulation and reality hopping as just another Tuesday, Wolverine represents the fixed point, the established continuity that the multiverse threatens to dilute or erase. This structural opposition suggests that the film might use their partnership to comment on the very nature of superhero film universes, the struggle between maintaining beloved canon and the constant creative need to reboot and reinvent. The expected visual payoff will surely involve Jackman delivering deeply serious lines while Reynolds performs an elaborate, distracting physical feat just outside the frame, forcing the audience to choose where to focus their attention. A perfect microcosm of their entire relationship. The introduction of a multiversal context elevates the stakes beyond mere character conflict, weaving their personal friction into the fabric of comic book history itself. For Wolverine, the constant reboots and shifting realities are an existential threat to the hard-won meaning of his suffering. Every resurrection, every soft reset, chips away at the finality that Jackman so powerfully conveyed in Logan. He is the ghost of a completed narrative forced back into service. This narrative device allows the film to weaponize nostalgia against Logan, forcing him to confront various iterations of his own past, perhaps even seeing alternate versions of himself that made different choices, further deepening his inherent melancholy. Deadpool, conversely, thrives in this environment of malleability. He is the perfect agent of chaos within a fractured reality because, for him, nothing is truly canon until he jokes about it. Reynolds excels at embodying the audience's own fragmented understanding of long-running superhero sagas, making Wade the necessary disruptive force. His ability to reference deep-cut comic lore or obscure cinematic moments provides a layer of intellectual engagement for longtime fans, contrasting sharply with Wolverine's focus on visceral, immediate survival. When Wade manipulates timelines, it's not just a plot point, it's a comedic commentary on the industry's reliance on retcons. Emotionally, the core tension remains centered on vulnerability versus armor. Jackman's Logan rarely allows himself soft moments. His connection to others is usually expressed through sacrificial acts or brutal protection. In pairing him with Wade, the script has an opportunity to force that vulnerability through incessant, inescapable badgering. Wade's constant needling serves to wear down the formidable emotional defenses Logan has constructed, not to turn him into a friend, but perhaps to allow a moment of genuine, exasperated affection, the kind of bond formed between two deeply flawed soldiers who realize they are the last ones standing. Visually and sonically, the contrast must be maintained at every turn. We expect the action sequences to oscillate wildly. Moments of pure, visceral, grounded brutality, the sound of claws hitting bone, Logan roaring through a fight, followed immediately by sequences of brightly colored, almost cartoonish violence, where Deadpool suffers improbable injuries only to bounce back instantly, accompanied by upbeat, anachronistic pop music. This oral and visual dissonance is the signature of the franchise, but here, it serves a higher dramatic purpose, to illustrate the fundamental incompatibility of their worldviews. Ultimately, the success of this highly anticipated team-up rests on whether the narrative can find a resonant emotional frequency shared between the man who desperately wants to be forgotten and the man who insists on being seen, loudly. The true success of this unprecedented coupling will hinge on the screenplay's ability to elevate their relationship beyond the typical adversarial pairing found in many buddy films. It cannot simply be about Logan reluctantly tolerating Deadpool's antics. There needs to be a genuine narrative reason for their continued reliance on one another, a common threat so existential that it renders their personal philosophical differences temporarily moot. This shared imperative must force an alignment of action, even if their underlying motivations remain poles apart. For Logan, this imperative might be protecting a concept or person he has sworn to defend one last time, a final act of atonement. For Wade, the imperative is likely tied to surviving the immediate catastrophic event, but perhaps also protecting the novelty of his own existence within a reality that seems determined to course-correct itself. We must also consider the potential influence of external, perhaps bureaucratic, forces hinted at by the wider cinematic context. If the Time Variance Authority, or an analog organization, is involved, they represent the ultimate expression of ordered narrative control, a system Wolverine distrusts due to its inherent artificiality, and one Deadpool will inevitably attempt to subvert or mock for sport. This institutional antagonist provides the perfect external pressure cooker for their internal tensions. Logan represents the organic, painful evolution of character, while any multiversal enforcement agency represents the sterile, manufactured continuity that has always plagued the X-Men films. Reynolds, having proven his acumen in navigating fan expectations, will likely use any such organizational meddling to turn the narrative lens onto the audience itself, questioning why we demand these characters remain fixed in specific emotional states across decades of consumption. Jackman, grounding the chaos, will respond not with words, but with the sheer physical manifestation of refusal, the immovable object against the unstoppable commentator. The key emotional payoff will be the moment, likely near the climax, where Wolverine allows Deadpool a fleeting gesture of genuine camaraderie, perhaps a shared, meaningful look that confirms, "We are both broken messes, but for this moment, we fight together. It is in these quiet acknowledgments, buried beneath the gore and the gags, that the film will justify its existence as a true cinematic event, honoring the decades of investment by these two towering figures in the landscape of modern mythology. The underlying resonance of this pairing, ultimately, speaks to the pervasive theme of manufactured identity versus authentic selfhood within the superhero genre. Wolverine is the epitome of the unwilling soldier, constantly battling the programming of his past, the Weapon X conditioning, the relentless cycle of death and resurrection. Jackman's portrayal has always emphasized the heavy toll of that imposed identity. His gruffness is a necessary shield against the memories etched into his psyche. His arc has been a slow, painful shedding of that manufactured shell toward a semblance of quiet humanity, a journey tragically curtailed by his previous cinematic farewell. Deadpool, by stark contrast, embraces his manufactured nature. Wade Wilson is the result of medical horror, yet he weaponizes that trauma with laughter, turning the grotesque into the marketable. Reynolds' interpretation suggests that true freedom lies not in rejecting the absurdity of one's origin, but in dominating it through relentless self-mythologizing. He is the chaotic product of failed science, who nonetheless achieves a form of cultural immortality through sheer nerve and fourth-wall annihilation. Where Logan fights to forget who he was made into, Wade insists on reminding everyone who he is, loudly and offensively. This clash of approaches is what generates the film's dramatic fuel. If the narrative positions them against a foe obsessed with imposing order, be it a timeline regulator or an alternate reality dictator, Wolverine's struggle becomes about protecting the sanctity of earned experience, while Deadpool's goal is to exploit the resulting narrative loopholes. The emotional breakthrough for the duo will likely arrive when Logan recognizes that Wade's obnoxious defense mechanisms are simply a different, albeit louder, coping strategy for profound existential pain, mirroring his own isolation. It's a recognition that, beneath the adamantium and the rapid-fire insults, they are both survivors burdened by exceptionalism. The visual realization of this theme needs to be meticulous. Expect moments where the camera lingers on the texture of Wolverine's aging skin, every scar a testament to genuine, costly survival, while Deadpool might literally be patched up with bright, brand-new, conspicuously unscarred skin, emphasizing his instant regeneration as a narrative shortcut. This visual language reinforces the core philosophical debate. Is meaning found through enduring suffering, or through refusing to acknowledge suffering at all? The emotional reward for the audience lies in seeing these two disparate philosophies forced into a temporary truce, a shared visceral understanding that sometimes, even the man who can heal instantly and the man who cannot die need the other to simply stand beside them in the fray. The sustained focus on manufactured identity versus earned experience sets a compelling stage for exploring the concept of mentorship, albeit in a highly dysfunctional manner. Wolverine, having implicitly rejected the mantle of teacher or leader in his later years, is dragged back into a position of reluctant guidance by Deadpool's sheer persistence. This isn't about imparting wisdom, it's about Logan involuntarily setting boundaries for chaos. Reynolds' Wade often mistakes Logan's silence for approval, or, worse, misinterprets his stoicism as a challenge to be overcome with increasingly absurd antics. This forces Jackman to react physically. A low growl, a subtle shift in stance, communicating volumes where Wade would require an entire monologue. The emotional gravity of Jackman's portrayal demands that any moment of shared victory, or even grudging teamwork, feels heavy, earned through blood, sweat, and perhaps a few broken ribs on Deadpool's part. For Logan, cooperating with Wade is a regression. It pulls him back from the hard-won solitude that felt necessary for his soul's survival. He is forced to engage with a version of himself, the Weapon X experimentation, that is unburdened by consequence, making Wade the ultimate mirror reflecting Logan's own capacity for destructive immortality without the accompanying self-loathing. Deadpool's narrative function within this dynamic is to strip away the manufactured mythos Wolverine has reluctantly maintained. Wade will undoubtedly mock the sacredness of the X-Men legacy, the nobility of past sacrifices, and even the somber cinematography of Logan's past adventures. This relentless deconstruction is crucial. It allows the audience, who understands the convoluted history of both characters across various cinematic eras, to process that history through Wade's unfiltered, often offensive, commentary. If the film explores alternate realities deeply, we might see Deadpool attempting to fix aspects of Logan's past, perhaps warning him against certain tragic decisions, only for Logan to violently reject the intervention. This underscores Logan's central tragic flaw, and perhaps his final acceptance, that the pain is integral to who he is. For Deadpool, whose identity is built on self-mockery, the idea of having a fixed, regrettable past seems alien. The resolution, therefore, won't be about Wade becoming serious or Logan cracking jokes, but about Logan achieving a moment of weary acceptance that some forms of chaos, like Deadpool, cannot be extinguished, only momentarily managed. Their ultimate bond will be forged in the shared understanding that they are both anomalies destined to live outside the clean, edited narratives the world prefers. The exploration of shared anomaly deepens when considering the visual language of their respective regenerations. Wolverine's healing is often portrayed as agonizing, a gruesome process where tissue and bone visibly knit back together, emphasizing the cost of his longevity. It is a biological truth that Logan constantly fights against, a reminder that even if he cannot die easily, he is always enduring. Reynolds' Deadpool, however, treats bodily destruction as mere set dressing. His healing is instantaneous, cartoony, and often accompanied by triumphant music, turning trauma into spectacle. This difference is central to their philosophical divergence. One is defined by the scars he accumulates, the other by the absence of permanent ones. This visual contrast demands that the film find a compelling way to merge these two realities during high-stakes action. It suggests sequences where the environment reacts differently to each of them. Bullets might bounce off Logan with deadly inertia, while they might simply pass through Deadpool's temporarily unstable form. Or conversely, Wade might take damage that forces him into a temporarily muted state, requiring Logan to protect the suddenly vulnerable, non-joking version of his partner. This forced reliance on the other's specific ability, Logan's sheer durability, and Wolverine's lethal focus versus Wade's unpredictable adaptability and irritating persistence, will be the engine of their tactical synergy. Furthermore, the emotional current might touch upon the theme of finding a chosen family, a recurring motif in the X-Men narratives that Logan has largely failed at or actively fled. Deadpool, for all his superficial chaos, desperately craves connection, evident in his devotion to Vanessa and his various adopted sidekicks. If this journey forces them into a long enough period of reliance, Logan might experience a flicker of paternal responsibility, perhaps expressed not through tender moments, but through an extremely practical, life-saving maneuver where he ensures Wade's survival above his own perceived need for solitude. This would be Logan's ultimate concession, recognizing that some forms of companionship, however irritating, are necessary to endure the endless existence forced upon them both. The film aims not to turn the grumpy loner into a talkative friend, but to allow the scarred warrior to acknowledge the utility, and perhaps even the inherent worth, of the healing clown who refuses to let the silence win. The juxtaposition of their regenerative abilities serves as a potent metaphor for their engagement with the world. Wolverine endures reality, while Deadpool redefines it through sheer force of personality. Jackman's Logan exists in a state of perpetual reaction, his movements economical and rooted in the necessity of self-preservation, mixed with the memory of past failures. His combat style is an expression of controlled, explosive violence, born from decades of conditioning and necessity. When he fights, the audience feels the weight of every impact, every strain on his adamantium skeleton. This gravitas makes Deadpool's intrusions. A perfectly timed one-liner shouted mid-parry. A brightly colored costume clashing violently with the grim backdrop. Not just comedic interruptions, but intentional acts of psychological warfare against Logan's seriousness. Reynolds' brilliance here is ensuring that Wade's humor is not merely distraction, but an active offensive tactic. Deadpool seeks to shatter the narrative focus, knowing that if Logan is forced to process the absurdity of a situation, he loses the calculated edge that keeps him alive. This forces a fascinating evolution in their teamwork. Logan must learn to fight through the noise, internalizing the need for action while outwardly projecting complete disdain for the source of that noise. It's a subtle demand for mental fortitude beyond mere physical resilience. Should the film delve into the personal stakes, the question of legacy shifts from their public personas to their private regrets. For Logan, the regret is the family he could not keep whole. For Wade, it might be the fear of being truly seen, of having his chaotic facade dismantled to reveal the broken, wounded man underneath. The most poignant dramatic moments will likely occur when Deadpool's constant barrage finally falters, perhaps after an injury so severe that even his healing factor struggles, leaving him momentarily silent and raw. In that brief window of vulnerability, stripped of his defenses, Logan would see not a joke, but a fellow soldier broken by the same cruel mechanisms of immortality and mutation. It is in that shared, unvoiced understanding of being fundamentally wrong or other that their alliance solidifies, transcending the buddy comedy framework into something resembling tragic camaraderie, forged in the fires of shared trauma. The ultimate success of this venture rests on whether it allows these two highly guarded figures a moment of authentic, shared vulnerability, without forcing a complete overhaul of their established personalities. Logan cannot suddenly become jovial, nor can Wade suddenly embrace quiet introspection. The emotional truth must emerge in the cracks of their established armor. We anticipate scenes where the sheer exhaustion of living indefinitely finally overtakes both men, leading to a cessation of performance. For Wolverine, this might manifest as an uncharacteristic admission of weariness, a simple statement about the endlessness of the fight. For Deadpool, whose entire existence is predicated on deflection, this silence would be a profound act of trust, revealing the man underneath the mask who is tired of the constant performance required to survive. Furthermore, the film has the narrative freedom to dissect the very nature of fame and legacy within the superhero industrial complex. Jackman's Wolverine is a product of a specific, grounded era of comic book cinema, a hero defined by tangible pain and clear moral lines, even if blurred. Reynolds' Deadpool is the product of the internet age, self-referential, commercially savvy, and constantly mocking the very structure that made him popular. Their conflict can thus be read as a dialogue between cinematic eras, the earnest blockbuster versus the postmodern deconstruction. If the script wisely uses the multiversal angle to pit them against a force that seeks to erase or homogenize their unique histories, their cooperation becomes a defense of narrative individuality against corporate simplification. The chemistry needs to evolve past the surface-level sparring to address a deeper need: recognition. Logan needs someone who can witness his long, painful history without pity, and Wade, despite his constant self-aggrandizement, desperately needs someone who can see past the red and black suit to the man underneath. If the climax forces them into a situation where only one can survive, the choice made will define the extent of their bond. If Logan sacrifices himself for Wade, it would validate Wade's chaotic existence as having value, offering Logan a final, meaningful act of protection outside his historical failures. If Wade sacrifices his immediate comedic opportunity to ensure Logan's crucial objective is met, it signals a maturation, a temporary prioritization of Logan's burden over his own need for attention. These high-stakes emotional maneuvers, layered beneath the expected explosions and katana strikes, are what will elevate Deadpool Wolverine from a fun team-up to a defining character statement for both icons. The inherent tragedy of their respective immortalities will likely form the emotional bedrock of the film's third act. For Wolverine, his endless existence is a procession of goodbyes, a constant re-experiencing of loss that has calcified his spirit into a shield of near-unbreakable cynicism. Jackman excels at conveying this internal ledger of pain, where every victory is tainted by the certainty of future bereavement. Deadpool, with his chaotic regeneration, sidesteps the consequences of attachment. His immortality is a shield against meaningful connection, allowing him to engage fully with life while remaining emotionally detached because, fundamentally, nothing that happens to him is permanent. The narrative arc must therefore pivot on how Wade deals with Logan's established endpoint, whether that endpoint is truly final this time or simply another illusion shattered by the multiverse. If Logan is facing genuine finality, Deadpool's reaction will be the ultimate test of his character growth. Will he resort to frantic, absurd jokes to mask grief, or will he channel his chaotic energy into a focused, tangible effort to save Logan, utilizing his unique adaptability in a way that respects Logan's desire for an earned end? The latter scenario offers the richest dramatic potential. Wade accepting that some things, even for him, cannot be fixed, joked away, or regenerated. Moreover, the influence of the wider cinematic environment, particularly the concept of the timeline regulator, can be used to explore agency. Logan has spent decades feeling like a pawn of external forces: Weapon X, cosmic villains, and government agencies. Deadpool, being inherently unpredictable, is the antithesis of control. Their partnership, therefore, becomes a struggle for narrative self-determination. They are fighting not just for their lives, but for the right to define their own endings, free from the sterile edits of an external timeline guardian. The audience witnesses two titans, one defined by relentless trauma, Logan, and the other by relentless detachment, Wade, finally uniting against the systemic need to package and control their stories. The silent moments between them, where the roaring action subsides, must be suffused with the mutual understanding that they are the last authentic vestiges of a universe constantly trying to sanitize itself. The necessary convergence of their opposing philosophies on narrative control suggests the film will utilize the visual language of chaos to articulate their shared purpose. Wolverine's fighting style, even when allied with Deadpool, will remain grounded in tangible threat: the metallic shing of his claws, the guttural exertion, the tangible impact on his environment. This visual weight grounds the action in stakes that feel costly, even for an immortal. Deadpool's contribution, however, will likely involve exploiting the very fabric of the scene. Expect visual glitches, shifts in aspect ratio mid-fight, or moments where the background momentarily dissolves into vibrant comic book panels, indicating that Wade is consciously manipulating the localized reality around them, simply to create an opening for Logan. This synergy implies a strange division of labor. Logan handles the brutal physical reality of the fight, while Wade handles the meta-reality of the conflict. He attacks the rules, the continuity, and the audience's expectations, thereby neutralizing narrative devices that might otherwise favor a more orderly, perhaps hostile, antagonist. Jackman's task in these moments is crucial: maintaining absolute focus and deadly seriousness amidst the digital and tonal anarchy Reynolds unleashes. A single flicker of recognition in Logan's eyes, a micro-expression acknowledging the effectiveness of Wade's absurdity, will be the film's most profound emotional reward, signaling that he has finally integrated the utility of the ridiculous into his survival strategy. Ultimately, their journey through the multiverse should serve to recontextualize their individual suffering. For Logan, seeing myriad timelines where he made different, perhaps happier choices only reinforces the tragedy of his current reality. Yet Deadpool's presence makes that tragedy bearable, because it is shared with someone who understands the futility of trying to achieve a clean narrative closure. For Wade, encountering a Logan who has finally accepted his fate might be the closest he ever gets to understanding consequence. Their final shared moment will likely not be a heroic embrace, but a mutual exhausted retreat back into the shadows. Two anomalies content to have survived the machine for one more day, forever bound by the knowledge that they are the only ones who truly see the strings attached to their epic, agonizing existence. The climactic confrontation, therefore, must be deeply personal, leveraging the audience's emotional investment in both characters' pasts, a past which the multiverse conveniently places front and center. Imagine an antagonist capable of projecting Logan's deepest failures, the faces of lost loves, the spectral forms of fallen comrades, all rendered with perfect, agonizing clarity. Jackman will meet this barrage not with rage, but with a profound, almost spiritual exhaustion. This is the narrative purgatory Logan has been avoiding, being forced to relive his catalog of sin without the distraction of immediate combat. Deadpool's role in this final crucible is not to fight the memories, but to render them irrelevant through sheer audacious presence. When the spectral Jean Grey, or a ghostly Professor X, attempts to lecture Logan on his failures, Reynolds Wade will interrupt, not with a joke about their spectral nature, but perhaps with a pointed, surprisingly accurate observation about the audience's obsession with those past failures. This moment flips the script. Wade weaponizes the meta-commentary against the narrative manipulation itself, effectively protecting Logan's mental space by flooding it with his own, self-aware absurdity. It is the ultimate act of disruptive loyalty. The resulting emotional synthesis will be a quiet understanding achieved in the aftermath of total narrative overload. Having weathered an assault on their very identities, Logan forced to confront his fixed pain, Wade forced to confront the limits of his detachment, they reach a truce born of shared trauma exposure. The final shot needn't be grand. It could be a simple, shared observation on the ridiculousness of the situation they just escaped, delivered without a single clarifying joke from Wade, and met only with a barely perceptible nod from Logan. This nod, this shared recognition that they are two profoundly damaged artifacts refusing to be erased by narrative convenience, will resonate louder than any explosion. It confirms that legacy isn't about the stories others tell, but the endurance demonstrated when facing the ghost of your own story, alongside another equally haunted soul. The shared understanding forged in the fires of narrative confrontation allows the film to introduce a final, crucial emotional layer, the exploration of chosen kinship over forced partnership. Logan has always been defined by the families he was ripped from. The Primal Pack, the X-Men, relationships fractured by his own violent nature or external circumstance. He has never truly chosen a constant companion who matches his own level of existential burden. Wade, conversely, constantly fabricates a family structure, Vanessa, Weasel, Blind Al, to anchor his rootless existence. In the crucible of the multiversal threat, their bond solidifies not through mutual respect for their skills, but through a bizarre, involuntary acknowledgement of their parallel fates. For Jackman's Logan, this means allowing a single, unsolicited gesture of care from Wade to land without immediate dismissal or retaliation. Perhaps, after the final battle, Logan finds himself alone, the adrenaline fading, only to realize Wade has silently patched up a non-fatal but debilitating injury that Logan hadn't bothered to address, leaving behind a single, absurdly inappropriate piece of contraband, a vintage cassette tape, a note scribbled on a pristine piece of official TVA paperwork. This is Wade's way of saying, "I saw you hurting, and I chose to help without the fanfare." Reynolds Wade, having witnessed Logan stare down the abyss of his own fixed history, might achieve a momentary, genuine sobriety. The mask may remain on, but the hyperactive cadence of his dialogue might drop for a beat, replaced by a statement of startling clarity directed solely at Logan's survival. It won't be a profound philosophical thesis, but a simple, practical instruction rooted in shared survival. Don't let the next reality forget you, bub. This line, devoid of irony, signals that Wade has recognized the sanctity of Logan's ongoing, painful existence. A recognition that validates Logan's entire miserable journey in a way no past companionship ever could. The visual denouement should reflect this subdued intimacy. Instead of a dramatic parting shot against a sunset, the audience might be treated to a mundane, almost anticlimactic final image. Two figures, wounded and weary, stepping away from the wreckage, walking in the same direction, but maintaining a noticeable, respectful distance. They don't need to be friends. They simply need to acknowledge that for a fleeting moment, when the universe tried to delete their complicated histories, they chose to save each other's messy, contradictory narratives. It's the bond of two survivors who realize they are each other's most reliable witnesses. The enduring power of this unlikely alliance lies in its refusal to offer the audience the comfort of easy resolution. Their connection will forever exist in a state of tense, mutually beneficial proximity, never quite settling into genuine friendship. The true final note of the film should resonate with the lingering ambiguity that defines both characters' comic book histories, the inescapable nature of their roles as perpetual outsiders. Logan, having momentarily engaged with the world again, will inevitably recoil from the warmth, finding the vulnerability too costly to sustain. His silence following Wade's rare moment of sincerity will not be a sign of acceptance, but a necessary contraction, pulling his spirit back behind the adamantium shield that has kept him sane for centuries. Reynolds' Deadpool will understand this retreat instantly. He will likely respond not with hurt feelings, but with a flourish of renewed, self-aware chaos, using a sudden, ear-splitting sound effect or an unexpected costume change as a way to create necessary distance. This isn't rejection. It's the maintenance of the narrative firewall that keeps both men functional. Wade protects Logan from suffocating intimacy, just as Logan once protected Wade from being totally erased by the timeline police. Their goodbye will be an unspoken agreement. The universe has been momentarily saved, but their individual burdens, Logan's crushing memory and Wade's relentless distraction, remain intact and irreplaceable. The final sequence, therefore, must emphasize their divergence, even as they walk the same path. Logan will head toward the unknown horizon, seeking the solitude where he can process the unwelcome memories Wade helped him endure. His steps will be heavy, grounded, signifying his return to the weight of his own existence. Deadpool, however, will break stride, perhaps addressing the camera with a final, knowing wink, before veering off in a completely different direction, already composing the script for his next, equally necessary disruption. The audience is left with the certainty that these two figures, having served their shared existential purpose, will dissolve back into their respective narrative orbits, leaving behind only the faint, lingering evidence of an impossible but undeniable moment where the grumpy loner and the mouthy merc were, for a brief, glorious eternity, exactly what the other one needed. Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to the Q-Man channel. If you enjoy our content, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Today we are going to be discussing the movie Deadpool Wolverine 2024. The desert sun beat down, a relentless echo of the chaotic energy brewing within Wade Wilson, once the irreverent mercenary known as Deadpool, now seemingly adrift after the dissolution of the timelines he so carelessly manipulated. He wasn't exactly retired, more like on an extended, mandatory sabbatical enforced by the bureaucratic, almost painfully mundane Time Variance Authority, or TVA, a place so devoid of excitement it made fighting an army of cyborgs seem like a spa day. His usual wisecracks were muffled, replaced by a grudging compliance, a strange new layer to the character who built his legend on never taking anything seriously. This fragile peace was violently shattered by the arrival of X-23, Laura Kinney, a young woman whose very existence was a living testament to the shadowy, often horrific genetic experiments of the Weapon X program, the very crucible that forged Wade's own scarred exterior and equally damaged psyche. Laura wasn't just looking for refuge. She carried the heavy burden of a future that was rapidly collapsing, a sense that the established order, even the one overseen by the TVA, was fatally flawed. Her presence immediately dragged Wade back into the fray, less by choice and more by the inescapable gravitational pull of responsibility, something he'd spent years actively running from. The narrative quickly pivoted, drawing in a grizzled, world-weary Logan, the Wolverine, a man whose entire existence has been a cycle of violence, redemption, and inevitable loss. Hugh Jackman's return felt significant, not merely as a cameo, but as the embodiment of a certain strain of heroism that contrasts sharply with Deadpool's meta-commentary. Logan, much like Wade in his own way, is defined by his past, the countless lives he's taken, the failed attempts at normalcy. Here, he is presented as a reluctant mentor, or perhaps just a fellow survivor dragged into the whirlpool. His inspiration, drawn from classic samurai cinema and sheer brute force, clashes beautifully with Wade's pop culture-saturated approach. Their uneasy alliance is forged under duress, a necessary evil against a looming threat, perhaps another rogue element seeking to rewrite history, or maybe just the existential dread of their own frayed realities. The action sequences are predictably brutal, yet infused with a kinetic energy that highlights the unique fighting styles. Wolverine's relentless, almost purely instinctual slashing, and Deadpool's chaotic, fourth-wall-breaking acrobatics. There's a running commentary, naturally, from Wade, questioning the very structure of the narrative, poking fun at the tropes of team-ups, and lamenting the lack of decent chimichangas in this particular temporal nexus. As they navigate crumbling realities and evade the sterile enforcement of the TVA, the emotional core begins to surface. It's not just about punching bad guys, it's about finding purpose when your own existence has been manufactured or irrevocably broken. Laura represents a chance for both men, Logan to potentially redeem some of his failures as a father figure, and Wade to prove that beneath the scarred facade and the constant jokes, there is a flicker of genuine connection. The film builds toward a confrontation that demands true synergy, forcing the cynical mercenary and the stoic mutant to finally synchronize their methods, moving beyond individual trauma toward a shared, messy objective. The resolution inevitably involves a mountain of debris and perhaps a temporary, uneasy truce with the universe, leaving the door slightly ajar for the next inevitable catastrophe that only this specific, deeply damaged duo can handle. The strained camaraderie between Logan and Wade is a study in contrasts, a perpetual push and pull between existential angst and manic absurdity. Logan moves through the unfolding crisis with the grim acceptance of a man who has seen too many sunrises over too many graves. His dialogue is sparse, often just a low growl or a grunt that conveys volumes of accumulated grief. The weight of the adamantium seems to press not just on his bones, but on his very soul. This version of Wolverine feels particularly beaten down, perhaps haunted by the ghosts of timelines where he failed those he cared for most, his inspiration rooted in stoic honor codes that Wade cheerfully ignores. Wade, conversely, uses humor as both shield and weapon. His constant stream of non-sequiturs and self-referential jokes serves to momentarily deflate the crushing seriousness of their predicament. When they are forced into close quarters, perhaps sharing a cramped hiding spot or arguing over the last functioning communication device, Wade relentlessly probes Logan's emotional armor, not out of malice, but from a genuine, albeit bizarrely expressed, need for connection. He sees in Logan's world weariness a reflection of his own deep-seated fear of isolation. After all, Wade's entire career has been punctuated by characters who either betray him or die. Seeing the enduring, if miserable presence of the original X-Man is almost comforting in its predictability. Laura, the conduit for this reunion, possesses a silent intensity that commands respect even from these two veterans of chaos. She is the narrative's moral compass, possessing a raw, untamed strength that mirrors Logan's youth but is tempered by an adult understanding of consequence that Wade has never bothered to acquire. Her fighting style isn't theatrical. It's efficient, deadly, and speaks volumes about her inherent desire for survival in a world that tried to erase her humanity. Watching Logan watch Laura move is a subtle cinematic touchstone, a flicker of paternal regret crossing his features, an acknowledgement of a path not taken, or perhaps a path ruined by his own past actions as a blunt instrument of terrible science. The setting itself often feels like an active participant in their struggle, whether they are traversing a dimension where gravity is optional or fighting through the pristine, soul-crushing halls of a bureaucratic holding facility. The environment mirrors their internal states. The chaos of the action is always grounded by a raw, almost painful physicality. When Logan lands a devastating blow, you feel the strain in his knuckles. When Wade takes a hit, he's immediately calculating how to spin the ensuing injury into a new, profitable merchandise opportunity, even as his healing factor scrambles to knit bone. This blend of profound suffering and flippant disregard creates the film's unique tension, suggesting that perhaps the only way to truly survive the end of everything is to stop caring about the rules. A lesson Wade learned long ago, and one Logan is finally, grudgingly, being forced to relearn through his unlikely protege and his even more unlikely partner. The narrative trajectory consistently steers toward moments of poignant, unscripted vulnerability that pierce through the established layers of irony and anger. Consider a sequence where the trio is cornered, not by a supervillain, but by the relentless passive aggression of the TVA's temporal enforcement drones, machines devoid of motive beyond maintaining the status quo. In such a moment of overwhelming tactical disadvantage, Wade doesn't crack a joke about the uniformity of their armor. Instead, he executes a maneuver that perfectly shields Laura, a move born not of practiced choreography, but of pure, reactive instinct to protect the one person who seems genuinely to value the simple act of existing without an agenda. This is the crucial evolution. Wade Wilson acting without the immediate expectation of a payoff or a punchline. Logan's response to this selfless action is almost imperceptible, yet it forms the emotional climax of their temporary alliance. It's not a word of praise, but a slight lowering of his stance as he engages the drones, signaling an unspoken acceptance of Wade as a necessary, if irritating, part of the solution. For Logan, whose career has been defined by pushing people away to save them from his own inherent danger, this quiet acknowledgement is the equivalent of a heartfelt declaration. He is recognizing a fellow soldier, scarred in different ways, but equally committed to survival, even if survival means protecting a future they don't fully understand. This echoes Logan's own journey following his mentorship of Kitty Pryde, or X-23, where his greatest strength became the willingness, however painful, to engage with hope. Laura serves as the anchor in this temporal storm. Her silence is heavy with the weight of potential, the potential Wade squandered in his youth, and the potential Logan felt he betrayed. She isn't inspired by comic books or ancient martial arts. Her motivation is cleaner: stop the fracturing reality so she can simply be. When she finally does speak at length, it's often a direct challenge to one of the men, cutting through Wade's performance art and questioning Logan's perpetual melancholy. She forces them to confront the fact that their past traumas, the forced genetic enhancements, the endless battles, have left them perfectly equipped for this specific apocalypse, yet utterly ill-equipped for any semblance of peace. The visual storytelling leans heavily into this dichotomy. When they fight side by side, Wolverine is often rendered in deep shadows and sharp, metallic reflections, a creature of visceral reality. Deadpool, however, is constantly bathed in unnatural lighting, the harsh fluorescence of a forgotten government facility, or the vibrant, sickening greens of temporal distortions, emphasizing his status as an anomaly, a character existing slightly outside the established laws of physics and narrative consequence. Their eventual victory, if achieved, will not be clean or permanent. It will be a messy, painful affirmation that sometimes the most broken pieces fit together just tightly enough to hold the line against total collapse, powered by shared trauma, and the faint flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, they won't have to do this all over again next Tuesday. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation leaves the trio battered, not just physically, but spiritually exhausted by the sheer effort of imposing momentary order onto cosmic chaos. The bureaucratic tentacles of the TVA, though momentarily stunned by their overwhelming unorthodox firepower, begin to reassert themselves with chilling efficiency. This is where the true conflict shifts from external threat to systemic oppression. Wade, momentarily stripped of his usual bravado by the sheer scale of the temporal cleanup required, starts to see the TVA not as a collection of mildly annoying desk clerks, but as the ultimate gatekeepers of stagnation, the entity determined to keep the universe running on a predictable, uninspired track that actively negates the very essence of mutant existence. Logan, whose entire adult life has been a rebellion against imposed control, be it military conditioning or government experimentation, finds an unexpected kinship with Wade's sudden loathing for institutional authority. The shared enemy transcends their personality clashes. They both recognize the sterile uniformity of the TVA as another form of the control Weapon X sought to exert. There's a quiet moment where Logan, perhaps examining the scarred tissue on his own knuckles, looks at Wade not with irritation, but with a grim understanding. Both men are living embodiments of variables the TVA seeks to eliminate. Their previous battles were often about personal revenge or saving one specific person. This one is about the fundamental right to be messy, unpredictable, and alive outside the lines drawn on a timeline chart. Laura, having witnessed the capabilities of her two dysfunctional guardians, begins to actively strategize, her intellect matching her ferocity. She starts piecing together the TVA's operational weaknesses, viewing their rigid protocols as exploitable flaws, a perspective that blends Wade's chaos theory with Logan's tactical discipline. She might even be the one to decipher the true nature of the impending collapse. Perhaps it's not a rogue villain, but the TVA itself, whose attempts to prune too many branches have rendered the trunk too brittle. This places the focus squarely on an internal extraction or sabotage mission, forcing the team deeper into the belly of the temporal beast. The final act hinges on a calculated risk, using their own brokenness as camouflage. Wade suggests a full frontal assault disguised as a parade of temporal violations, knowing the TVA's response systems would be predictable enough to anticipate. Logan surprisingly agrees, recognizing the need to embrace their reputation as walking disasters. It's a desperate lunge for freedom, where their very existence, a healing factor defying conventional physics, a mind that breaks the fourth wall, becomes the ultimate countermeasure against a system obsessed with clean continuity. They fight not for a restored timeline, but for the right to exist in the broken one they've carved out for themselves, messy and magnificent in their mutual wreckage. The infiltration of the central temporal nexus, the supposed heart of the TVA's oppressive order, is less a